Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with the knife video for you. I need to apologize first off about the lighting. We've got some technical difficulties, and when I started to fix it, it's a little more involved than just a light bulb. So it's going to be a couple days before I can get things up and running again. But I wanted to go ahead and get this video out anyway. This is going to be my full review of the Ka-Bar Jarosz. I did a first impressions a couple of weeks ago, and so I want to get the follow-up out there because this is a pretty cool knife and there's not a lot out there. So I wanted to make sure I gave you guys some information here. This is a collaboration with Ka-Bar Jarosz, a custom maker, and this is based off of his Kepler model, which by all accounts is a phenomenal knife. In researching for this, I found so many people who just raved about the custom version, the Kepler, that I was very, very impressed. So, you know, pretty neat to see when a knife that is extremely loved in a custom gets translated into a production knife, although there are some things about this that I think could be improved, even if this was a little closer to the actual size of the custom. Now, let's talk about Ka-Bar and then going this direction. I think this particular design and working with this designer, Ka-Bar Jarosz, was a great move by Ka-Bar because at the $40 price point, which is where this lands, there are like a ton of knives out there that you're competing with. And so because of that, you've got to do something different and interesting. And I think this is different enough in terms of design and what it's doing that compared to other knives in the price range, it does have enough difference to stand out and hopefully be successful. Now, there are a couple things that I would like to see tweaked on this, and hopefully someone from Ka-Bar will check this out and give that a little bit of thought. But overall, this has done some things really, really well. Okay, so let's start off with size and weight, and then we'll get into sort of the close-up version or close-up view of this over with on the tabletop. So size on this is 8 inches basically. It's just a 1/16 over, 3.5 inch blade, 4.5 inch handle, and the handle is actually where that extra 1/16 of an inch seems to come in. Weighs in at 5.25 ounces, which is pretty hefty for an 8-inch knife, but certainly not the end of the world. And I've carried this quite a bit for review purposes and had no issue with feeling like I was carrying something too heavy. Okay, but I know some of you out there, you know, you've got a magic number in your head, and 5.25 is going to be over that. But let me say, you know, this is a knife that I had no problem carrying at all, and I don't really think you'll have a problem either. Okay, so I feel like I'm appearing and disappearing with the way the lighting is working. Sorry again about that. Let's go ahead and switch to the top-down view so we can get a little more consistency here. Thanks, guys. All right, guys, so here we are with the close-up view of that Ka-Bar Jarosz, and want to start with the blade and kind of work our way through the knife the way that we're used to doing. I will take a second right now, though, and bring in some competitive options. And there's a very particular reason for this. This is an extremely competitive portion of the market. So there's the Jarosz with Aussite steel FRN handle, and it comes in about $40. Here is a blade that comes in around $50. That's the carbon fiber in D2 Rat 1. Here is a blade that comes in around $30. That is the standard Rat 1 in Aus 8. Or, by the way, you can get FRN with D2, and they're about $32 as well. What else have we got here? I have the Real Steel H6, again around the $45 price point. So very competitive with this. Let's see, here is the Kershaw injection. Now this is not going to be as hard use. I wouldn't put this under as much stress as the Jarosz, or I wouldn't feel confident that it would handle that stress as well. But again, it's very close in size and it's very, very budget friendly. Need to bring in a couple of other blades here that even mess with this equation a little bit more. I got a couple of Gonzo knives, and both of these are pretty well built and would compete pretty closely with the Jarosz, only for about half the price. So the reason I show you all of those is because one of the implications, or one of the things we need to kind of ask in this video is, you know, Ka-Bar coming into this segment of the market, have they really brought enough to the table to compete against all of those other knives, plus many, many more that we haven't mentioned, okay? So let's start with the blade, and I'll try to point out some of the things that I think are really well done about this, that maybe does put this in a better category than some of those other knives we've just been looking at. So blade on this is Aus-8 steel, which is going to be fine. It's you know, a decent budget steel. It is very thinly hollow ground, and you have some pretty thick, hefty blade stock here. So again, like I've said before in other reviews of hollow ground blades, I like a hollow grind, especially with thicker blade stock, because it allows you to still get a good slicey cutting edge while having a very thick, robust blade overall. And so, you know, I find that a hollow ground blade works really, really well on this knife, and really on any knife of this design. You know, this is designed to be a pretty hard use folder, and I think they've really achieved that. And so one of the areas, let's give credit where credit is due, I would feel more comfortable using this than a lot of those others I just showed you in a more demanding role, because it's just a little overbuilt, right? The blade stock is the thickest of all of those knives that I showed you, okay? So the blade on this, I think, is a total win. It's very versatile, it slices well, it's very tough. Even the finish on this. Now, we may be having a different conversation if we were looking at the Tanto blade here. Tantos are not quite as versatile as drop points, and so this blade in particular, I think, is very, very good, and I have found it extremely useful for everything that I've done with this knife. And in fact, even slicing tasks like going through a bunch of cardboard or stuff, the blade stock is not so thick that it starts to hang up or create extra friction when you're doing a more slicing oriented task, like cutting a bunch of cardboard or cutting, you know, large fruits in half, or anything of that nature. So great blade, very tough, very thin edge geometry, and I've actually been pretty impressed. I've got to say, you know, Aus-8 is a fine steel. Ka-Bar has definitely done a good job heat treating this. I've put a fair number of, you know, a fair amount of use on this, and it's still very sharp. I have not actually sharpened this other than to hone it just a little bit, and it is extremely sharp still, even after quite a bit of cutting. Now, moving on to lockup and deployment. And so again, the blade, I think, is a real win on this. Great blade shape, great strength, great usefulness, you know, nothing to complain about on the blade. Moving on to the handle, or I mean onto lockup and deployment, I've got to say the same thing. Overall, very impressive. If I show you there, the very thick stainless steel liners, you know, the Wrap Model 1 has a reputation for toughness and durability, and I think you can pretty much see even there without me holding them side by side, but I will hold them side by side. The Jarosz has significantly thicker liners, which is a real achievement, which is really, really good, and it's very comfortable. So, you know, you've got these nice thick liners, which are still, you know, it unlocks. I don't know why I couldn't get that out of my mouth there, but it unlocks still very comfortably and very easily. Let me show you what I mean by a relief cut. Nope, that one doesn't have one. Surely I've got a knife with a relief cut somewhere here. That one doesn't have one. Sorry guys, I'm not even going to be able to show you what I mean, but a lot of liner locks are going to have a relief cut in them, like right here somewhere, which makes that spring a little easier to actuate. I'm actually not a fan of that. I think it weakens the spring, and I don't think it's necessary. Just based on the knives that I've just shown you, none of them have a relief cut, and they all work extremely well. This one is no exception. So we've got thick stainless steel liners, no relief cut, and a very, very positive lockup. So in terms of the lockup itself, absolute win. Very, very impressive. Next, let's consider the deployment, which again is a total win. There is a really, really nice detent on this blade. And again, this is something that I'm not used to seeing in a budget knife. They've really got the detent dialed in here so that when you give that a little flick with your thumb, it flies out with authority, which is just what we like to see. And so in terms of lockup and deployment, I've got to say, once again, absolute win. Teflon washers, which is not a problem. I'm not a fan of the proprietary pivot hardware there. You'd have to have some kind of a spanner tool. That's kind of annoying. But the reality is this thing is solid as a rock. And so, no worries at all in terms of how that, in terms of lockup and in terms of usefulness and deployment speed and all of that. I've got to say, once again, like the blade, lockup and deployment, again, a total win, with that one minor nitpick, which is the pivot screw is going to require a specialty tool. That kind of sucks. But it's absolutely fine, and I've used this for quite a lot. I've flicked it open and closed hundreds, maybe thousands of times, and it's still totally comfortable. Now, I want to move on to the handle, and I've got to say, this is where there's going to be a bit of disappointment. I've got some negative things to say on this handle, starting with the fact that it's a little small. Okay, so this is an 8-inch knife, and that should be more than sufficient to give me a full comfortable grip. But because of this fairly abrupt angle here at the back, it actually feels like the knife kind of disappears. It feels like when you have it in hand, the handle's only this long, even though it's this long. So that is one of the complaints that I have about the handle itself, is just overall it's too small. Further, this dimension could be a little bit thicker. If you made it just a teeny bit thicker and therefore more hand filling when you're doing hard use tasks, it would be a little more comfortable with prolonged use. Now, I hate to be overly negative, but we're still not done yet. The FRN scales are quite smooth, and I feel like they could be much grippier than they are, and could actually just be G10, okay? I know that they're shooting for a particular price point, but the reality is, this Gonzo knife is like 15 bucks, and it has G10 that's very grippy. It's not as grippy as, say, a cold steel or something, but this texture on this knife would be an absolute game changer. I've got to complain a little about the handle material being FRN, not G10. And even if it was, FRN that had a good grip on it, I probably wouldn't be saying what I'm saying right now. It's just not as positive a grip as what I'd like to see, especially considering this is designed to be a hard use knife. Like, this is a knife that I feel like is constructed in such a way that it could really, really take a beating. But when you're doing that kind of hard work with a knife, often you're going to get sweaty and dirty, and having a knife that doesn't have great traction is not ideal in that situation. So that's my next hit on the handle, is that it's very smooth. Finally, there's a pretty bad hot spot right here. And it's just the way, notice how there's no space between, or very little space between the edge of the clip there and the bottom of the handle. It's just too small. So while this is not absolutely uncomfortable, and for light use tasks, it's acceptable, as soon as you get into harder work, you right away notice that there are some issues with the handle. Now, here's what that all results in. I end up kind of feeling in a kind of being put in a weird spot as a reviewer here, because there are things that I love about this knife. The blade shape is phenomenal, and I can tell you, even with the cutting that I've done with it, the performance is outstanding. The edge geometry is just absolutely great. Okay, so I've got this blade that I absolutely love. I have a detent that is so dialed in that it just flies out of the handle. Again, I love that. One of the things that I often have issues with on more budget-friendly knives is that the detent isn't great, and that is so not true of this knife. This is, great. Further, I love those super thick liners. Just, extremely tough, durable, just fantastic in terms of how well constructed and strong and confidence inspiring that is. I've got to say, huge win on that part. Now we come to the handle stuff, and it's a little too slick, it's a little too small. I've got pretty severe hot spot. Further, if there were standoffs here instead of a backspacer, and if there was some milled out holes into these liners, you would also cut off some weight. So those are the negative things that stand out to me about this. All right, so that's, I feel like, the liners and the detent and the blade and the looks and the overall design and all kinds of things are a huge win on this knife. And definitely, I think those are enough to set it apart and make it still compelling and interesting compared to a number of the other blades that I've shown you. But because of those few glaring issues with the handle, it becomes, there's just sort of a dark cloud hanging over all of that awesome stuff that I've just shared with you. So this knife could be a home run, and really, I'll probably share this video with Ka-Bar, and if someone from Ka-Bar watches this, I'd love to hear you in the comments. But this would be an absolute home run, best budget knife on the market type of category, except for those pretty glaring issues where there's some issues with the comfort of the knife, with the overall size for really hard use tasks. I find that it develops a lot more hand fatigue than it needs to. All right, so there you go. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will talk to you soon.